Okay, hello, my name is Wesley, this is Wu Can Cook. Today I'm doing a Kung Pao chicken that is based off of a recipe that I wrote a couple months ago, last month, 2 months ago, last month or 2 months ago, which was loosely based off of hacking Panda Express recipe for Kung Pao chicken, but is pretty far removed at this point because it kind of takes a lot of liberal choices beyond the Panda Express version. So we did a recipe video, or I did a recipe video, I think that was back in October or November, that took a shot at recreating the Panda Express Kung Pao chicken. And then I took another shot at seeing what that Kung Pao chicken would look like if I removed all of the American elements and then replaced them with some traditional Chinese ingredients. So the version that we're going to do today is my own version, which removes a lot of those Chinese or a lot of those American ingredients, so mainly sugar and yeah, mainly just sugar and a little bit of I think the original version that I did had some honey in it. And I'm going to replace it with some more traditional Chinese elements. So I think more specifically we're going to be using a little bit of black vinegar and fish sauce to replace some of that sweetness and get more of a complex flavor and sort of like a more traditional Chinese flavor palette involved in this particular Kung Pao chicken, which is super interesting and kind of like is part of a whole series that we've been doing, exploring Chinese American food and seeing what it kind of like, what happened to Chinese food when it came to America and why does it look the way that it looks. So if you're interested in stuff like that, I recommend hopping over to the YouTube channel where we have been releasing all of the recipe videos for pretty much everything that I cook on stream. That's at youtube.com/WuCanCook. Lots of fun stuff over there, including the recipe for this exact Kung Pao chicken. If you're watching on YouTube, you're already there. That's just the YouTube channel that you're watching on right now, so I recommend hopping over and giving it a subscribe if you haven't already. We're working our way to a 1,000 subscriber goal by the end of the month, and I'm pretty sure we'll make it, but we'll take lots of commitment. So, as with many recipes that I do, I'm starting with some crushed and then finely minced garlic, followed by some finely minced ginger. You will find that lots and lots and lots of Chinese recipes will start with these two ingredients, including pretty much every single recipe that I've ever written. And that's not because we're trying to impart the flavor of garlic and ginger in everything, although you will find that they are two very common or very prominent flavors, especially in Chinese cuisine, but mainly because they're sort of like the baseline layers of umami that we impart anytime that we're working with something that requires umami. And umami in Chinese food is probably the most prominent quality of Chinese food when it's savory. So umami is, I guess, like that third, like kind of, it's hard to describe what umami is, but it's sort of like a little bit sweet, a little bit savory, kind of like so it's what you would describe as like what soy sauce is if you weren't to describe it as salty. Soy sauce is not just salty, it's also a little bit savory, and it's a little bit fermenty. So that is what umami is. So when we're building out layers of umami, oftentimes a good starting point to start building out those layers of umami starts with garlic and ginger. And these two ingredients will be the first two ingredients that we throw into our wok as our aromatic elements, and then we're going to release those aromatic flavors in the hot oil of the wok, and then follow it up with all of the other layers of umami that we're going to be adding. So things like soy sauce and hoisin sauce. Today we're going to be using spicy black bean paste, pretty much anything that deals with fermentation, that's going to be going on top, and that's all adding to our layers of umami. But at the baseline of that layer of umami is going to be our garlic and our ginger. Okay, so that is our ginger. You're waiting for the live show. Oh, cool. That's awesome. Thanks for tuning in. I'm here every Tuesday and Thursday, 6:30 PST, Wednesdays at 6 o'clock, and then every Friday, new recipes popping up on the YouTube channel. So Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, live streams, Fridays for recipes, and occasionally I'll stream on weekends, so Fridays and Saturdays, if I have time, but not as consistently though, for sure. What's my favorite genre of music? I listen to a lot of music. I play in a funk band, so I listen to a lot of funk music. So I've been into lately. I've been into like more like lo-fi R&B genres of funk. So like, I've been really into D'Angelo. Super into. What have I been listening to lately? Let's see, I've been really into a guy who's doing some stuff. His Spotify handle is Still Woozy. He does some pretty sweet like lo-fi, like hip hop funk, I guess. I don't know really what you call that, but I listen to a lot of music though. But the band I play in is called Trace Repeat. And actually, I just started a solo project that's kind of tangenting off of this cooking channel, which is called Woo Cooks Beats, and it will be where all of the music that goes underneath the voiceover of this show will come from. So, including the track that's playing underneath my voiceover right now, that's all popping up on the channel for Woo Cooks Beats. So, lots of fun stuff coming up. Right. So next, I'm doing some green onions. So for this particular iteration of my use for green onions today, I'm separating the whites and greens of my green onions, and that's because the hardier and more durable portion of the green onion, which is the whites, are going to be added to the heat of our wok with our aromatics. So I'm going to toss them in with our garlic and ginger. We're going to let the aromatic qualities of these green onions, or of the whites of these green onions, bloom with our aromatic flavors. Now, the greens of your green onions are not quite as durable as the white portions, so we want to treat them a little bit differently, so I'm going to be using them as a garnish. And when I use the greens of green onions as garnishes, I very frequently, and I love chopping the greens of green onions on a bias. So we're slicing them. Bias just basically means cutting it on a diagonal, and that gives us this nice, like larger shape, or it like holds a little bit more presence in the final dish, which I find is super useful in the use of the greens of green onions as a garnish. Since oftentimes, if you're not careful, the greens of your green onions can kind of just disappear into the dish, especially as a garnish, because once you start tossing, it kind of just disappears. So I found that the use of a bias cut with green onions super useful, and kind of giving it a little bit more presence and a little bit like a little bit more shape and body. Thundercat, yeah, I love Thundercat. I listened to a lot of Thundercat's first record, which I forget what the name of it is. The one with the guy, he's like his face is half underwater. It's the one, I think, the one where he talks about cats a lot. But I think I love more than Thundercat's original stuff is the stuff that he collaborates on, because I think he's probably as good or maybe better as a producer. So I love the stuff. I think I definitely heard him on some Mac Miller stuff that was really dope, and I can't remember what song that was. But yeah, everything that he like collaborates on, I feel like is what my favorite Thundercat material is. The stuff that he collaborates on. Oh, man, I wish I could remember that Mac Miller song right now, but I can't remember it. And I'm pretty sure I've seen him pop up on, I think it was an Anderson .Paak track, maybe. I'm blanking. But yeah, I love the stuff where he like does collaborative. I think that's where his like forte is. Also, like the guy that's at the forefront of like avant-garde, not avant-garde, but like essentially like jazz returning to like pop music. So like people are like him and Kamasi Washington are the two guys that people talk about when they say like, oh, pop music is like jazz is back into pop music. Jazz isn't really back into pop music. It's just like two weird guys playing stuff that are like collaborating with pop musicians. So the face cam froze again. If you're watching on YouTube and you notice that my face cam freezes, it freezes a lot. So let me know if it does freeze. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see there is a bar for tips. It's not on the Reddit page, but it is on the YouTube page. The reason that it's on the YouTube page is because that camera keeps freezing, and I don't know why. So I'm raising some money to replace that stupid camera so it stops freezing. I don't know why it freezes. I think it's because the camera that I'm using for that side is a piece of crap. So that's my best guess. So I'm sorry about that. It should be working again, but let me know again if it does freeze again. I think the last stream it froze like 3 or 4 times, so super annoying. Let's see. So next I'm going to chop up some onions. So I'm thinking about how I want to chop these. I think in the original recipe I sliced these, but I didn't think that was a great choice. So I'm actually going to do a large dice today. So for your large dices, you really actually want to leave the roots on. That'll be okay though. But I'm going for slices down the center, then one big slice down the middle, and then we're going for a pretty large dice here. So I'm going to go for about half-inch size bits. So something we're looking for bits of onion that are about this size. They're about so like a half-inch piece or so. So our goal is to make sure that our onions are roughly in the same size and shape as the rest of our veggies, which will be coming up next. Alright. How do I sharpen the knives? Yeah, that's a great question. So I think someone else asked this recently too. So I do 3 things to sharpen my knives. So the main thing that you will see me do at the start of every stream is sharpen with a knife steel. And a knife steel, contrary to popular belief, actually does not sharpen your knife. All it does is, what it's actually doing is straightening the edge of your knife. So as you cut, the more that you cut stuff, the more frequently the knife will start developing micro dents in the blade. And what that does is it kind of results in the knife feeling a little bit duller, even though it's technically not dull. It's just not straight anymore. So what we do with the sharpening steel is we run the knife on it, and this process we often see like in movies and stuff is like referenced as like sharpening the knife, but that's not actually sharpening the knife. That's actually just toning the knife and straightening out the edge of the knife. So I guess ultimately at the end of the day, it also gives the same feel of a knife that's a little bit sharper. So in that context, I guess technically it is sharpening. The second thing that I do, and I do this at the start of every stream, is I use my strop. And a strop is essentially just a piece of leather. So if you can't find a strop, just a plain old leather strap will work. So I have friends that just use a leather belt, and the same thing. And this is the thing that you will see. Barbershops will do the same thing for like when they're sharpening the razors for your cheek. And they do this before every time that they use the blade. So they run the knife across the piece of leather, and this is sharpening the knife. But it does do it at a very, very micro level. So if you're sharpening, should be the last thing that you do for your knife, because it gives that nice little bit of edge. And the third thing that I do, I don't do this every day, but I do it, I would say, like maybe like 5-6 times a year. But the main reason why I only do it 5 or 6 times a year is because I actually own 2 of these knives. So when one goes dull, I'll start using the other knife. And the third thing that I do is use my whetstone. This is a whetstone. A whetstone has 2 separate sides. So my whetstone this side is a 6,000 grit, and this side is a 1,000 grit. So the 6,000 grit is a little bit more rough, and we use this side to tone and sharpen the knife. So what we do is we soak the whetstone in some water, and then when you take the knife out, it's kind of like a sponge, so it kind of gathers water in it. We use the whetstone to sharpen the blade, and then we use the finer side to sharpen it even finer. So I do that maybe 5 or 6 times a year with my knives. And the real reason that I can get away with doing it only 5 or 6 times a year is because I own 2 of the knives that I use. They're 2 of the exact same identical knives. So here's my other one. They're literally exactly the same. So the reason that I only sharpen it 5 or 6 times a year is because when one knife goes dull, I just start using the other knife for about a month, and then that one goes dull, and then I'll have to sharpen my knives. So those are the 3 things that I do to sharpen my knives. They're probably like 3 of the most common things that you do. Every once in a while, I also live pretty close to a knife sharpening shop. I'll take my knives into the professional shop and have them professionally sharpen the knives. And that's like the best thing that you can do to get your knife super sharp. But also not super necessary as long as you own a whetstone. Do I have a Twitch? Yes, I do have a Twitch. I don't use it anymore because people weren't really, or I wasn't really using it that much anyway. So what I started using, so I do have a second stream that's always running, and it's the one on the computer behind me. And that's streaming to YouTube actually. So I stream, the second stream goes on straight onto YouTube, where a couple folks are already watching. Yeah, 3 or 4 people are following on YouTube. And that's also the place where I post all of the recipe videos that go along with the live streams. So If you're looking for somewhere to bookmark and keep an eye on Wu Can Cook stuff, that's probably the place to go. And that's the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen, which is youtube.com/WuCanCook. So lots of fun content over there. Also, I have been doing a pretty good job actually of making sure to announce everything that I cook before we start the streams, so that if you're interested in reproducing what I'm cooking today, you can buy the ingredients ahead of time and pick them up and cook alongside me. So it's always more fun when folks cook alongside me, because then we can kind of talk about all of the mistakes that we make. So I know I make lots of mistakes. So yeah, if you haven't followed already, hop over to YouTube. Definitely check some of that stuff out. It's where the YouTube channel is where I post all of the recipe videos that go along with pretty much everything that I cook on stream, including this particular dish. I did a recipe video for this Panda Express pack. That was either a month ago or 2 months ago. I lost track of time now. But lots of Panda Express content popping up on the YouTube channel. And then I kind of like talked about things that have happened to Chinese food when it came to America. So kind of like taking a look at what Chinese American food looks like, why it looks the way that it does, and sort of like what did Chinese people do to the food that they were cooking in order to make it like interesting and palatable for Americans when it first arrived in America, which was probably in like the early 19th century. For this particular recipe, I did 2 different versions. The first version was in an effort to recreate the exact recipe for the Panda Express Kung Pao chicken. The same ingredients, all of the same like veggies, and then sort of like took my best shot at like recreating that super sweet, very like savory forward Kung Pao chicken. And then I took a second shot and like kind of removed all of those American elements, so made it a little bit less sweet, a little bit less saucy, a little bit less like aggressive, and incorporated some of the more like traditional Chinese ingredients. And that is the version that we're making today. So if you're interested in stuff like that, I recommend hopping over to YouTube, checking out some of that content. There's also a live stream hopping up or going right now on the YouTube stream as well. So that's a fun place to be. Also, I've been told it's a little bit easier to watch if you're watching Reddit on your phone. You can pop it up on a laptop too. I've been told that the YouTube stream is a little bit easier to watch if you're trying to pop it up and leave it running. Cool. So the next veggie then, so I just finished chopping up some zucchini. I probably just talked my way through the whole thing. But that was some zucchini that I just chopped up. Probably zucchini is probably one of the most iconic things that you can add to a Kung Pao chicken. But really anything that has like a really durable veggie quality to it, I think works really great. The next thing that's probably the most iconic veggie to add to a Kung Pao chicken is actually a red bell pepper, or any kind of bell pepper really, but red bell pepper specifically. Today I actually had a bell pepper for this recipe, but I ate it on accident for breakfast like last week. And I forgot that I was saving it for this Kung Pao chicken, so I actually don't have a bell pepper today. So I am going to substitute it today with the use of celery, which I have also found is pretty common in Kung Pao chicken. So with celery, you also always want to be sure to snap this stuff in half and break off these stringy bits. So the stringy stuff is really annoying to chew on because it will like get stuck in your teeth. That's all of those stringy bits are not parts that you want to end up in your particular stir fry. So we want to remove all of that. But all you have to do, snap it in half and it'll expose this stringy bits and then pull it off. I like to snap it maybe twice to make sure that we get all of it, and that's about it though. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, that's awesome, yeah, thank you for subscribing. Hamcharo didn't show up. I wonder what's wrong with Hamcharo. I haven't seen Hamcharo in a little while. I think Hamcharo is on a long delay, because I did see Hamcharo, but it was for a subscriber that subscribed like 2 days ago. So I think Hamcharo is working, but it's like, he's not showing up lately. Hamcharo is the hamster eating ramen that pops up on screen every time someone subscribes. So hopefully Hamcharo will start showing up soon. He's very hungry. Hamcharo only gets to eat when someone subscribes. So I hope you keep subscribing. We're working our way to 1,000 subscribers by the end of December. Hopefully we can make it. Alright, so you'll notice I'm chopping my celery pretty large here, so I'm also chopping it on a bias because a bias is going to be a little bit larger and a little bit more present. The reason that I'm chopping my celery pretty large is because in the past when I have cooked with celery, because celery is mostly water, I've found that it starts to break down a little bit if you chop it too small. So remember that celery is mostly water, so it does the same thing that cabbage does, which is it starts to just sort of fall apart after a little while. So running out of bowls. Right, so let's set that aside. So if you've watched these streams before, then you know that probably the first 30 to 35 minutes of every stream is essentially just chopping stuff. And there's a reason for that, and that's because wok stir fries, they come together very, very quickly once you start putting stuff in the wok heat. So before we move over to the wok, we want to make sure that we have as much of our cooking and chopping done beforehand, before we start moving over to the wok. So once stuff is on the wok, then we're under a time crunch. So we want to make sure that all of this chopping and as much of the everything else is done beforehand. So that's to make sure that nothing burns. So in French cooking, this is a process called mise en place, which is essentially everything in its place, something like that. I knew the translation for mise en place once, and I forget. Something like that, though, and it's essentially the process of making sure that you have all of your prep work done before you start cooking. So that's very useful to make sure that you don't burn stuff. So probably the number one thing that like amateur chefs, number one mistake that amateur chefs make is not making sure that their mise en place is done before they move over to the stove. So if you're trying to get better at cooking, I recommend the first thing that you should take a shot at is do all of this chopping first. So if you've watched these streams before, you'll know that, like, I would say at least the first 30 minutes of every stream is basically just me chopping stuff. And then once stuff gets into the wok, it really comes together pretty quickly. Like, usually when we're on the wok, probably no more than 10 minutes, sometimes even less than that. So, and that's because wok heat is very, very hot, which means everything is done in a flash cook. So everything is going to cook very, very quickly once it's in the wok. Alright, so for our chicken element, I'm using chicken thigh today, so I'm kind of deviating. I deviated a while ago from the Panda Express recipe. If you followed the Panda Express recipes that I've done before, you'll know that almost every chicken dish that Panda Express makes is done with chicken breast. So I have a couple theories as to why they use chicken breast. My first theory is that chicken breast is cheaper, so I think that might be the main reason why they use chicken breast. It's definitely like not the most common thing to do, especially because they even do it with their deep fried chicken, and that's like very uncommon to use chicken breast for a deep fry. Most commonly when you do like a honey sesame chicken or a kung pao or like a General Tso's chicken or anything like that that's breaded, you will use chicken thigh. That's because chicken thigh has a little bit more fat and it's a little bit more rich. Pairs very well with the deep fry. I have not honestly figured out exactly why that Panda Express always uses chicken breast, but my best guess is it's because it's cheaper. But today I'm going to use some chicken thigh because it's going to taste better, because it has more fat. So since chicken thigh is a little bit fattier and a little bit richer, it's going to have a lot more flavor and a lot more like, it's just going to be a lot richer than what a chicken breast would be doing. So, is that it for chopping? I think that is it for chopping. So, moving on. Next, I'm going to do our quick marinade. So there's two more things that we have to do before we head over to the wok. The first is marinade, and the second is our sauce. So for our marinade, I'm going to start with some soy sauce. They started using butter. Is that true? Really? I didn't know that, but that's kind of, I don't know how I feel about that. It's definitely not a Chinese thing. I've never heard of butter used in a Chinese stir fry. That's very interesting, though. I wonder what that does. I guess that just like contributes to a lot of fat. Very curious. Yeah, I don't know. Like, that's what's so interesting to me is that like Chinese American food is so far removed from what Chinese food is. That to me, it's not even Chinese food anymore. It's just Chinese. It's just American food. And that like when I see things like butter or like even like lots of times I'll see white wine used in Chinese food, and all of it is because they're subs. They're subbing out something. So when white wine comes up in a Chinese recipe, what they're doing is they're substituting either Shaoxing wine or probably both Shaoxing wine and rice vinegar. And then if you use white wine, it's basically a similar flavor, but like more Americanized, a little bit less pungent, and a little bit less fermenty, and probably like more familiar of a flavor to the American palate. So things like that. When I see like butter popping up in Chinese recipes, that's super interesting to me because I have no idea why you would do that in a Chinese recipe, especially in a wok, because butter in a wok, that's probably going to burn, right? I don't know. Anyway, so for our marinade, I'm starting with, this is 4 tablespoons of soy sauce, followed by 2 tablespoons of Shaoxing wine, which I just mentioned earlier. Shaoxing wine, if you're not familiar with it, is essentially a Chinese cooking wine. If you have never seen or can't find Shaoxing wine, it is essentially just dry cooking sherry. So, but if you can't find either of those things, the qualities that we're deriving from Shaoxing wine is the alcohol, as well as a bit of sweetness. So, someone recently asked me a good way to substitute for Shaoxing wine if you can't, or if you don't want to use alcohol. So I guess if you're trying to assemble this recipe, you live in America and you're under 21, and it's kind of difficult to figure that out. But my best solution was rice vinegar plus a little bit of sugar. Food looks so good in the recipe videos. That's awesome. Yeah. Cool. That's a tablespoon of sesame oil. Yeah, they look better in the recipe videos because the camera fidelity is better. So I find lots of times, like in the Reddit videos, like my hands look okay, but I think like it's gonna be a little bit grainy. Might look better on YouTube actually. I can't tell. Alright, next I'm adding, this is going to be 2 tablespoons of hoisin sauce. Any cornstarch? Yes, actually. Great question. I was going to talk about that. So I'm going to use cornstarch in 2 different places in this recipe. So I'm going to do a cornstarch slurry towards the end. But I also love the use of cornstarch in a marinade, and this is sort of, someone recently asked me like a good way of creating like really tender but also flash cooked meats in a wok. So I think the real secret behind like super tender wok fried chickens and beefs, especially beef, especially if you're doing something like flank steak, which is already pretty chewy, or not flank steak, but skirt steak, is the use of cornstarch. And that's because cornstarch, when added to a marinade, protects the meats a little bit from the really high and aggressive heats of wok cooking. So very frequently when you are marinating a meat for wok cooking, you will see chefs use a tiny bit of cornstarch. So not very much at all. I'm going to say like half a teaspoon. The first time I did this recipe, I used 2 full tablespoons, and it was way too much cornstarch. So. But yeah, cornstarch in a marinade, very helpful in keeping your chickens and your beefs super tender. And the last thing that I'm going to add is a tiny bit of white pepper, which I've been adding to a lot of marinades lately because I think it just works really well. I think it's one of those ingredients that, like, as soon as you use it, it's kind of like garlic powder when you're first starting to cook. It's sort of like one of those ingredients where it works so well that you just start using it in everything because it's just like, why not? It just works. And the white pepper is like has all of the qualities of pepper, like fresh ground pepper that you're looking for, where it's like bright, very forward. And since it's very bright and forward, makes it very useful for a marinade. But at the same time, it doesn't have super large grains, which means that it disperses into the marinade better, and also is not going to carbonize in your wok heat. So, right, so that was a pinch of salt, and then I'm going to mix this up, and we're going to let it marinate for a little while. Probably should have gone for a little bit longer, but it'll be okay. If you're really committed, this probably should marinate for at least 30 minutes. Probably only going to marinate today for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. That'll be okay. But the longer that you let your meats marinate, the better, for sure. Okay. best use of cabbage. There's a lot of good uses of cabbage in Asian cuisine. I will say my favorite use of cabbage is in Korean street cooking with eggs, and that's just like one of the things that I've been super fascinated, kind of obsessed with lately is Korean street food with their use of cabbage. And like to me, the way that Koreans use, I feel like the combination of cabbage and scrambled eggs with like toast is sort of like reminds me a lot of cheese corn. So like Korean cheese corn, which is sort of like a culture that has like found an American thing. So cabbage, or in this like the same thing is going to be true for cheese too. But like it's like a thing that's used in American culture. And then it's just used completely wrong, but it's somehow it works. So very frequently, if you watch Korean street food videos, if you just look up like any recipe, any video that's doing like Korean street food with scrambled eggs. So lots of times like an egg sandwich or something, they take scrambled eggs and then they mix it with like finely minced cabbage. And what the cabbage is doing is like it's creating a little bit of thickness. So when you add it to scrambled eggs, it creates this nice patty. So it creates like an egg patty that you like put in between like 2 pieces of white bread plus a couple of sauces. I'm pretty sure it's probably gochujang and some other stuff. And to me, it's just like this. And then they like cover it in mozzarella cheese. And that to me is like a bunch of American stuff that's not supposed to be done that way, but just this culture that's just sort of like, cool, American stuff, let's just throw it in one thing. So that's my favorite use of cabbage lately in Korea or in Asian food is very non-Asian use. But definitely cabbage, Asian food super common, kimchi, very useful too. Okay, so for our sauce, I'm going to start with 4 tablespoons of soy sauce. If you're very confident in your recipe building, you can also just throw this stuff straight into the wok. I very much prefer doing it off heat so that we can taste it afterward and make sure that we have a full and comprehensive understanding of what our sauce actually tastes like. So oftentimes when you see these recipes come together, or when you see restaurant chefs throwing these things together in like the kitchen or sometimes even in street food, you'll see them just throw it straight into the wok, sometimes with a big soup ladle. And the reason that they can do that is because these chefs are making these recipes probably at least 50 times a day, right? Because they're making, you know, they're doing kung pao chicken, but they're making it like probably someone orders it every 10 minutes, right? So they're probably not even tasting what they're cooking at a certain point because they make it so many times, right? So since I'm not making this 50 times a day, I like to taste my sauces beforehand just to make sure that it is what I think that it tastes like. So, also, that's also part of the process of don't just blindly follow a recipe. Follow it until it doesn't make sense to you anymore. So taste it. What does it taste like? Do you disagree? Change it. I change recipes all the time. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to add, this is going to be a tiny bit of brown sugar. I think the original Panda Express recipe video that I did, or recipe that I did, I think it used like 4 whole tablespoons of brown sugar. So we're down to a single teaspoon. And I think that single teaspoon of sugar is actually going to be super important too. You finally caught one live. Yeah, cool. Hello, Gulf Shrimp. Thanks for tuning in. I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. I'm streaming here every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 PST, Wednesdays at 6 o'clock. Although this will be the last stream of the week because it's almost Christmas and I'm going to go home for the holidays. So the next time I'll be streaming won't be until Tuesday next week. But after that, every Tuesday and Thursday, 6:30 PST, Wednesdays at 6 o'clock. And if you haven't subscribed already, every time I live stream, I'll announce what I'm cooking at least 24 hours in advance, sometimes more than that, on the YouTube channel so that you can, if you want, follow along and pick up the ingredients for what I'm cooking and you can cook alongside. In addition to that, lots of times, most of the time when I'm cooking something on stream, I'm probably cooking something from a recipe that I've written myself, including today. So the recipe that we're doing today is for a kind of an alt version of a Panda Express hack to Kung Pao chicken that I did a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago now. That's up on the YouTube channel, so if you're not already watching on YouTube, that's at youtube.com/WuCanCook. So if you're watching on Reddit, that's the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. Lots of fun content over there, including the recipe for this exact video. So, yeah, thank you, Safe Charles. I'm just going home to my parents' place, so that's like 30 minutes away driving. So, but very, very small, very, very COVID-safe holidays today, or this year. But yeah, if you have been tuning in regularly, just a heads up that this is going to be the last stream of the week because it's Christmas. So the next time I'll be back will be until Tuesday. Okay, so next I'm adding, this is going to be 2 tablespoons of black bean sauce. Black bean sauce definitely does not belong in a Kung Pao chicken, so if you're looking for things that definitely do not belong, especially if you're looking at American ingredients, this doesn't belong here. Black bean sauce is probably most commonly found in a Chinese dajamian, which is a Chinese like black bean noodle. I guess like I kind of think of it as like Chinese bolognese or like meat sauce, Chinese ragu sauce, something like that. But black bean paste definitely, it does not belong in a Kung Pao chicken, and that's because Kung Pao chicken is definitely not supposed to be as aggressive in fermentation as what black bean sauce does. But I have started experimenting it when I was writing this recipe, and I think it works really good. So if you can get your hands on it, highly recommend it. Very tasty in a Kung Pao chicken. All right. Next, this is going to be 2 tablespoons. With a little bit more than that. Yeah, probably 2 tablespoons of spicy chili crisps. So, spicy chili crisp is a very strange name. I guess spicy chili crisp is the name on the jar. If you have been to a Chinese restaurant, it's one of the hot sauces that's sitting next to the soy sauce. So usually, when you go to a Chinese restaurant, somewhere on the table will be a small Lazy Susan, and that Lazy Susan has probably soy sauce in it. Next to that, probably some kind of vinegar. Next to that, probably some kind of sesame oil. And then there will be 2 other things usually in that Lazy Susan, one of which is going to be sambal olek, which is spicy chili, like fermented chili paste. And the other one is probably this stuff. So some kind of chili flake that's fermented and then like fermented in oil. So that's this. And I think I saw this pop up actually on an Uncle Rogers video, but very, very, very frequently, if you go to a Chinese like grocery store and you don't know, if you go to a Chinese grocery store, they'll probably have like 5 or 6 different versions of this exact sauce, probably of this same like many sauces. Look for the one with the old Chinese lady on it. That's the one to get. Pro tip. Actually, that's another good pro tip. If you're in a Chinese market and you're looking for oyster sauce, the oyster sauce that's like more oystery than other oyster sauces is the one that has the little kids on it with the colors. So when you go to a Chinese market, there will be 2 of them, at least 2 of them, especially if you're shopping for Li Kum Ki. Li Kum Ki is probably where like most like the big box store supplier for Asian sauces. When you look for Li Kum Ki, there will be 2 of them. Both of them will see Li Kum Ki oyster sauce. The one that's nicer, that has like more flavor to it, is the one that has like pink color at the bottom with the 2 kids on it. So, and it will say something like pink or premier oyster sauce or premium oyster sauce or something like that. So, that's like insider Chinese knowledge that you only know if you have been going to the grocery store with your mom since you were 6. Oh, we forgot the stock. Alright, so the last thing that I'm adding to this sauce is going to be a 1/4 cup of beef stock. So today I am using up, not quite almost the last bit of my own homemade beef stock. So if you don't have a homemade beef stock, you can also just do this with a chicken bouillon stock or any kind of stock that comes from a powder. All of those things will work fine too. Mainly what we're deriving from our homemade beef stock is a little bit more thickness and richness in our sauce. So if you are using sauce from bouillon, I would say add a little bit more cornstarch to your cornstarch slurry, and that's going to compensate for the thickness that we're missing out on from our beef stock. Right, so just a 1/4 cup, just to make sure that we keep the moisture down in our sauce, and that is it for chopping. So if you've been timing it, we've been chopping stuff for almost 40 minutes, and we're ready to head over to the stove. As long as you can keep Kung Pao leftovers in the fridge. Probably about a week, maybe a little bit less than that, probably like 5 or 6 days. After that, it starts going. So I think the main reason that it's going is because of the chicken. So if you don't have chicken in your kung, so if you do like a veggie kung pao chicken, maybe a little bit longer. But if it has chicken in it, maybe about a week. After that, probably not super safe to eat anymore. What I like to do when I have leftovers is I'll usually keep it in the microwave for a day or two. So if you have plans to eat it within a day or two, pop it in the microwave, and that will keep a lot of the moisture intact. So if you have like leftovers from dinner and you plan on eating it for like breakfast or lunch the next day, that's a really great way of just storing the leftover, keeping the bugs away from it, making sure that it's not exposed to air, but also making sure that it doesn't dry out, which happens anytime you put something in the microwave. And if I plan on storing it for longer than that, I'll pop it in the fridge for up to a week. And if I plan on keeping it for longer than a week, I'll usually throw it in the freezer. So lots of times the food that I cook on stream is going to my brother, who picks up stuff once a week. So I freeze everything for him, and he hasn't complained about it, but I'm not super confident that it's working. But also, he's getting free food, so I guess he can't really complain. Alright, hopping over to the stove. On our stove, my wok has been heating up for a good while now, probably about 20 minutes. And the first thing that I'm going to do is actually not the first thing that I do most of the time, and that's going to be, I'm going to toast some peppers, and I'm going to do it in a very, very dry wok. So we're not adding our oil first right now. Most of the time, probably 99% of the time that I wok cook, chef recommended, yeah. I will also say that the only thing that I have ever used my microwave for, other than storing food in it, is to defrost meats. Other than that, I don't ever use it. When I have leftovers, I almost always just either eat the leftovers cold, or sometimes I'll sort of heat it up on a pan, but usually, almost always, I just eat it cold. Alright, so in our wok, I'm throwing in these are Tianjin peppers. Maybe these are Japanese peppers. But Tianjin peppers are this is the general shape and size of a Tianjin pepper, which is long and very dry. And I'm tossing it into our dry wok. That's probably could use a little bit more than that. And I'm going to give these peppers a toast. So that's going to release a little bit of the heat and spiciness of our peppers. These are also, by the way, not edible. So in your final dish, you're going to end up picking these out because they're not something that you really want to chew on. But they do impart a lot of flavor, especially if you give them a toast first. So I'm just going to let these toast for maybe 30 seconds, just long enough until you start smelling some of that capsaicin coming out. Yeah, it's looking good. Right, so we're pulling that out. I'm actually going to toast a couple of things right now. The next thing that I'm toasting in my dry wok is a pinch of Szechuan peppercorn. So if you've never tried to toast Szechuan peppercorn before you use it, highly recommend doing it. But do it in a dry wok. Otherwise, if you use oil to do it, it's just going to burn. So same thing, I'm going to let these go for about 30 seconds, maybe a little bit less than that. Just long enough until they start blackening up and crisping up. And the very last thing that I'm going to toast up is my peanuts. And where are my peanuts? Alright, so probably the most iconic thing in a Kung Pao chicken is the use of peanuts. I have gone back and forth on using raw peanuts. I've sort of just found that the use of raw peanuts does not really add anything substantial than using just like plain old Planters peanuts. So if you can't find raw peanuts, or if you're just looking for a shortcut, you can definitely just skip this step and use some toasted plain old liquor store peanuts. Will also work too. Alright, so I'm giving these peanuts a toss. We're just looking for them to pick up a little bit of color, a little bit of blackening, and just generally get a little bit more crisp. black beans. Yeah, no black beans in the kung pao chicken. All right, that's looking good. So I'm gonna remove this from our wok, and we can pop that over here. Oh man, stupid camera. I've been counting the YouTube face camera just froze twice now, which is fun. It is. All right. So back off of our stove, we have three things that we just toasted up. This is our Szechuan peppercorns, our Tianjin peppers, and our peanuts. So peanuts, we're gonna set these aside till the very, very end. I love adding the peanuts at the very end. Otherwise, if you add them too early, they kind of end up just turning into like mushy peanuts, which is like an unattractive quality for nuts in a stir fry. So we're gonna add those in at the very end. It will be the last thing that we toss in, and that's to make sure that they stay crispy. In my mortar and pestle, I'm gonna grind up my Szechuan peppercorns. I used to do this. If you were watching, I even keep them stored in a pepper grinder. So if you don't own a mortar and pestle, they also will just work just fine to just grind it straight from a pepper grinder. But I found that crushing them up in a mortar and pestle releases a little bit more of the heat and flavor of Szechuan peppercorn, especially if you give it a toast first. So if you have one, I highly recommend it. Or if you just have I also have used just a plain old rolling pin, or even a muddler if you do mixed drinks. All of those things will work too. So if you can't get your hands on a mortar and pestle, definitely just do that. Are woks hard to clean up? Yeah, good question. So this has been something that I've been recommending. Don't worry for all the questions. Questions make it fun. So this is something that I've kind of been bringing up at the end of every stream now, almost every stream now, is at the very end of when you're done cooking, and I'm probably going to talk about it at the end of this stream too. The very last thing that you want to do every time that you finish cooking is clean your wok, especially if you have something that's made of cast iron or carbon steel, or anything that has like a seasoning to it. Those types of metals, including my wok, are a lot easier to clean when they're still hot, and that's because when they heat up, they develop a nice non-stick coating. Once they cool down, especially if there's something in it, stuff is going to stick to it, and you won't have that non-stick coating anymore. So while the wok is still ripping hot, remove all of your food from it. You should be removing it anyway because you might risk carryover cooking at that point. So remove everything from the wok and then give it a rinse down. And if you have done your job properly, almost everything should just come off with that rinse. Sometimes if something is caked on, so if you messed up or something, I oftentimes sometimes, especially when I'm working with like eggs, stuff will get a little caked on, and that will come right off with a spoon. So, but as long as you clean that wok when it's still hot, it will generally be a lot easier to clean while it's still hot, and it is not that difficult at all. So with my carbon steel wok, I usually give it a rinse and then heat it back up, put a little bit of oil in it, wipe it down, cover it in a very, very light coating of oil, and that's it. Very similar to the way that you treat cast iron. So, sleeping your amazing chef voice. Yeah, thank you. All right, so back over on our stove. I guess I should say, yeah. Hello to everyone just joining. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. Today I'm cooking a Kung Pao chicken that's loosely based off of a Panda Express pack that I wrote a couple weeks ago, I think almost a month ago now. In that video, I did a version that was replicating the Panda Express Kung Pao chicken, so we used a lot of sugar and just a lot of sauce. I'm pretty sure I incorporated a little bit of honey and a whole bunch of brown sugar in it to get at the Panda Express flavors of Kung Pao chicken. In that video, I also did a second version of Kung Pao chicken, which removed a lot of those American qualities of Kung Pao chicken. So it dialed back that sugar a lot, and then removed a lot of the saucy qualities of it that are like very, very heavy and just aggressive, and replaced them with some of the more traditional Chinese ingredients that you find in a lot of Chinese cuisine, but are not super common in Chinese American cuisine. So I took out a lot of the brown sugar that I was using and replaced it with, today we're using black vinegar plus fish sauce. So fish sauce gives us a little bit of like fermented sweetness, and black vinegar is very similar to rice vinegar, but it has a little bit more of a malty sweetness to it. And then added on top of that is going to be some Shaoxing wine, which is also a little bit sweet. So, and a pinch of hoisin sauce too. So all three of those things are replacing the huge amounts of sugar that we added, and replacing it with still sweetness, but like more complex sweetness that kind of drives at like what traditional Chinese food will actually taste like. So I've been kind of doing a whole series on Panda Express lately, but just generally in like Chinese American food and like deconstructing Chinese American food and sort of looking at like what those dishes will look like if you remove the American qualities and replace them with like traditional Chinese ingredients. All of that stuff pops up on the YouTube channel. Generally, everything that I'm cooking on stream has a recipe video that goes along with it, including this video. So if you have not yet and you're not already watching on YouTube, I recommend hopping over, and that's if you're watching on Reddit, the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. If you're watching on YouTube, that's the channel that you're already on right now. So, what else? We're working our way to a 1,000 subscriber goal by the end of the year. I'm pretty sure this channel is going to make it 7 days to go. I think we'll make it. Just going to take some hustling. The last thing I want to mention is if you watch these streams every week, two things that I want to mention. If you watch these streams every week, I have been doing my best to announce what I'm going to be cooking at least 24 hours in advance, sometimes more than that. And that's so that you can pick up the ingredients for what I'm cooking if you want, and cook alongside me. So it's always more fun to cook with each other, so we can talk about all of the mistakes that we make. I know I make mistakes all the time, so they're less nerve-wracking when we can talk about them. So yeah, if you're interested in following along and keeping track of what I'm cooking, definitely pop over to the YouTube channel and checking out some of that stuff. Otherwise, feel free to keep asking questions. No question is dumb. I don't know everything about Kung Pao chicken, but I know lots of stuff, so hopefully I can be helpful. Alright, so over on my wok, we're ready to cook. You will notice that at this point we just have almost coming up on an hour of chopping stuff, and the remainder of this dish is going to come together very, very fast. So I'd say the remainder of what we're going to do will probably happen within 5 or 10 minutes, maybe even less than that. So the first thing I'm going to do, we do this every time that we cook in a wok. This is a process in Chinese cooking that's called long yao, and that's essentially adding cold oil to a very, very hot wok. And this is to create a nice non-stick surface on your wok that you can use to cook on. If you add cold oil to a cold wok and then turn the wok heat on, you will have a very, very sticky surface. So that is not what we're after. All right. So I'm starting with my aromatics. So this is garlic going in, followed by my ginger, and the whites of my green onions. And then I'm going to give this a toss in our hot oil just long enough until it becomes fragrant. So usually for me that ends up being about 10 or 15 seconds, but really at this point, use your nose. Pay attention. What does it smell like? Right, so next I'm going to add my chicken. The chicken that we're doing today has quite a bit of liquid in it. So before we add the chicken, I'm going to drain some of this marinade. And that's to make sure that we're not adding too much liquid to our wok. So I'm draining off into the sink here as much of the liquid as possible. And then when I add it to the wok, I'm being sure to leave behind as much of the liquid of our marinade as possible. So I actually drained off most of it in the sink, but there's still a little bit of liquid left behind. And that's to make sure that we keep the moisture in the wok as minimal as possible. Right. Ginger. So I'm going to let that go. That's going to take maybe a minute or two. We're just looking for a little bit of color to pick up on our chicken. And then as soon as that's done, we're going to pull it out and employ a process of wok cooking on a home range that we call batch cooking. And batch cooking is essentially the process of cooking certain elements and then removing it and then cooking your next element. And what happens when you remove stuff from the wok is that you're able to keep the heat of your wok up more substantially than you would if you kept adding stuff on top of each other. So the quality of a wok is the same as any real pan, really, is that as you add more elements, the heat of the pan is going to start drastically dropping. So if you're dealing with dealing with a back over here. If you're dealing with qualities of metal like cast iron or stainless steel even, those pans or those metals have a quality about them that retain heat a lot better. So woks have two qualities about it that we want to talk about. The first is that they heat up very, very fast, but the second is that they cool down very fast. So those are the two big qualities that we need to work around. So the way that they get around that in a restaurant is they employ very, very, very high heat. So they have huge jet engine burners that help keep the wok hot at all times. You won't have that on a home burner, so the way that we work around that is we batch cook. So by removing things from the wok and then cooking the next thing, that makes sure that everything that you're cooking in the wok, when it's still cooking, is still making contact with very, very high heat. So I just removed my chicken and then I gave it a rinse down, and then I'm letting the wok come back up to temperature. That might take maybe a minute. And then we're going to add our veggies and cook our veggies next. So, by using batch cooking, by using the process of batch cooking, this helps us cook each element on very, very high heat without getting a super soggy stir fry. Is the oil room temperature? Yeah. So the oil is just straight up room temperature, so it just sits in the kitchen. But the wok is very, very hot. So cold oil plus hot wok equals nonstick surface. So and that's what we call in Chinese cooking long yao. How do I know the wok is at temperature? Very good question. So, and I will show you. So, most commonly, this is probably a process that I've seen most commonly done with wooden chopsticks. But I think any wooden utensil will work. And I think we need a little bit more heat. The first thing that you can do to make sure that your wok is hot enough is when you start seeing it smoke like that. So, when you start seeing smoke coming off like that, that means that you have a really, really hot wok. But the second thing that we want to do, is so we're going to do our long yao. So I'm adding my cold oil to our hot wok, a little bit more than that. And then I'm going to give it a swirl to make sure everything is coated. And then at this point, if you're still not sure that your wok is very hot, at this point I'm pretty sure that it is hot. And that's because I'm just pretty familiar with this wok. But take your wooden utensil. Today I'm using a wooden spoon. Most commonly in Chinese cooking, you'll see them use a wooden chopstick. And we put it in the oil, and you should hear sizzling and bubbles popping up around the wooden utensils. So I'm pretty sure you can see that. Lots and lots of bubbles sizzling around our spoon. That's an implication that your oil is extremely hot and ready to be cooked in. If you don't see those bubbles, that means it's not hot enough. So stop and wait for it to heat up a little bit more. Chicken, is the chicken half cooked? It's about I'd say 95% cooked. I'm leaving it a little bit undercooked, and that's to accommodate for it. At one point, it's going to go back into the wok and finish cooking with everything in it. But I want it to be almost completely cooked, and that's because we want most of the cooking to happen on that very, very, very high heat. So, all right. So I'm starting with my zucchini. Now the other two veggies that we're adding to our stir fry is going to be our onions and our celery, both of which are not nearly as durable as our zucchini. So I'm going to add those in a little bit later. I'm going to give this maybe a 30-second head start. A little bit longer. Cool. Alright, so next I'm going to add my celery to the wok. Remember, again, I mentioned this earlier too, that celery is mostly water. So that means that it is eventually going to start breaking down. So as it cooks, you'll notice that the volume of your celery is going to start drastically declining. That's okay. Just be aware of that it is going to start shedding some water in that flash cook. Okay, so we're gonna give our veggies maybe a minute, maybe 2 minutes. Just a little bit of a head start before we add everything back to the wok, and that's really about it at this point. Okay. Yeah, there it is. All right, so we have a nice flash cook on our veggies. I'm seeing a little bit of color, which is mainly what I'm looking for. And then I'm adding our chicken back to the wok. You'll notice that there is a little bit of liquid going on in our chicken, and that's because the chicken breast is shedding off its fat. So the fattier that your chicken breast, the more moisture it's going to have. That's also okay. That's the kind of moisture that we want, although we do want to monitor and be very careful about how much moisture is actually involved in our chicken here. Right. So I'm going to let that go. Actually, I'm going to add my tangent peppers in next. And then I'm going to let this go for another minute. And I am going to make sure that my peppers make nice contact with our wok here. We want to make sure that those peppers get nice in contact with the oil here. Because as those peppers reach that oil, the oil is going to release a lot of capsaicin. And we want to release as much of this flavor from these peppers as possible. Remember that those dry tangent peppers are not edible. So the main purpose that they serve right now is in the cooking. So the main flavor that we're going to derive from it is the cook. So it kind of reminds me a lot of how like bay leaf is used in Italian cooking. Which we, at the very end of our cook, eventually, usually with a bay leaf, you pull it out. In this case, it's actually part of the presentation, so most often in a kung pao chicken, you'll see it left in, but it's not really edible, so. Do I ever make recipes without meat? Yeah, actually, I used to do it more. I haven't done anything like that in a while. I did a veggie gyoza on a live stream recently, but pretty much everything that I can cook, I've also at some point substituted tofu with. So the pad thai, I definitely have substituted tofu with. Pretty much all the noodle dishes. I have definitely done this dish with firm tofu before. And the main difference is that if you're cooking with tofu instead of chicken or beef, is just don't add it to the wok until the very, very end. Add it at the very end, right before you add the sauce. And that's because you're not really looking for picking up color with the tofu. You're just looking to flash cook it. All right, so at the very, very end, this is very, very late. You'll notice I'm adding my onions. That's not because I forgot. That's because the onions are going to start breaking down as soon as they reach that wok heat. And we want to retain as much crisp crunch in our onions as we possibly can. So in an effort to retain as much of that crunch as possible, since I know that onions are very delicate, I'm adding it at the very, very end here so that they stay crunchy. And then very last, I'm adding my sauce. I'm going to reserve maybe 2 or 3 tablespoons of sauce here. And that's just to make sure that I don't over season. I have started doing that with almost every sauce now, just to make sure that I don't have too much sauce going on here. And I don't think I do actually. So. So if you can hear it, I'm pretty sure you can hear this. You'll notice that the wok is not sizzling nearly as much as it was earlier, and that's because the heat of our wok has drastically dropped. So for our case right now, that's okay because we're pretty much done cooking. That's the entire purpose of our batch cooking, is to do all of those cooking elements in batches on the high heat before we get over to the lower heat once the wok is filled with stuff. But at any point, if at any point you're cooking in a wok and you hear your wok start doing this, and that means very low sizzling, kind of simmering, sort of sounding like a pot of stew that's sort of reducing, that's not the quality that you're looking for in a wok. So if you hear that happen, that means that you don't have enough heat in the wok, and you need to stop what you're doing because you're on your way to a very mushy stir fry. In our case though, since we're pretty much done cooking, we're okay. The last thing I'm going to add is a tiny bit of cornstarch. So this is cornstarch slurry actually, so that is 2 tablespoons of cornstarch that's been dissolved in water. The reason that we dissolve cornstarch into water before we add it is because cornstarch, as I have discovered the hard way, cornstarch clumps up with literally anything. It will clump up with honey, it clumps up with gochujang, it will literally clump up with anything that's not liquid. So before you add it to your wok, if you don't want large clumps of cornstarch in your stir fry, dissolve it in some water first. And you will notice that as soon as I added our cornstarch, the sauce has immediately thickened up and we have this very nice, luxurious, thick sauce. And that is it. I'm going to add a pinch of salt. So last and most important thing to do whenever you're done cooking, taste it. See what it tastes like, add what it needs. So I'm making a last minute judgment. It needs a little bit more salt. So I'm adding a pinch of salt. All right. So, I mentioned this earlier, and I'll say it again. Every time that you're done cooking, the last thing that you want to do is rinse your wok. So, and this is obviously very frustrating because there's food to eat in front of you, but I promise you that it is so much easier to clean a hot wok than it is to clean a cold wok. And that's because while the wok's hot, you still have a very nice non-stick surface. Once it cools down, it starts sticking. So if you've ever cooked something in a carbon steel wok and then walked away, so say maybe go off and eat your dinner, and then come back 30 minutes later and then try and clean it, you'll find that it has a bunch of stuff stuck to it. And that's because you used to have a non-stick surface, but once the wok cools down, it's not non-stick anymore. And that means you now have to scrub. So if you have, especially with carbon steel or cast iron woks or even cast iron pans, if you have to scrub it, that means that you are on your way to scrubbing off your seasoning, which is not good. So worst case or best case scenario, you have to do a lot of work just to get the pan clean. Worst case scenario, you could actually potentially damage the pan. So good wok care. Make sure you clean it when you're done cooking. And I do 3 things. So I gave it a rinse in the sink. Then next is I'm putting it back on heat actually second, and then wiping it down with a paper towel. So all of this stuff, that's not stuff that we want in our wok. And then I'm adding a tiny bit of oil back to this paper towel, killing the heat, and then coating my wok in a tiny bit of oil. And that's to season it and make sure that it is nice and ready to cook on the next time I use it. And this is the part that lots of people forget, is you also have to season the bottom of your wok. And that's because the reason that we season, this is true for cast iron skillets too, is the reason that we season is not, part of it is because we want to have a nice cooking surface to cook on top of, but the second reason that we season is because, I should have been over here. The second reason that we season, there's nothing to see anymore, but the second reason that we season is because the seasoning prevents oxidation. So if you don't properly season your skillets in your carbon steel woks, you can very, very potentially develop a nice rust and oxidation to your skillets, which is not what we're after. Change of temperature break or hurt? Not if you have a good one. Um, so someone asked me this earlier too: is will it warp the walk? It will only warp the walk if you have a bad walk. And I think I have warped a walk once or twice in my attempts. But that only happens if it's not a very good walk. All right, so I'm finishing with my green onions and the toasted Szechuan pepper. And that is it. Alright, so I'm serving this. This is over brown rice, mainly because I foolishly bought a huge pack of, or a 10-pound sack of brown rice, and I have to eat it. I definitely like white rice better, but it's okay. Okay, so I mentioned this earlier, but those Tianjin peppers, they're not edible. Normally, I would just say just pick it out. Mainly what we're deriving from it is the flavor from it when it's cooking. But I found that very, very frequently part of the presentation of kung pao chicken is leaving those Tianjin peppers in. But what you're eventually going to do is just pick them out. And usually by the end of the meal, if you order kung pao chicken at a restaurant or something, the very last couple of things that are in the bowl is all of those Tianjin peppers because they're not edible. Okay. So, I mentioned this on an earlier stream too, but almost everything that I plate, I usually put fancy chopsticks next to it. And that's because they look really nice. But the real truth about it is that Chinese people only eat stuff with chopsticks when it's in a rice bowl, and that's because you can pick the rice bowl up and then shovel stuff into your mouth this way. If it's not in a rice bowl, so if it's on like a flat plate or even like a large bowl, it's really, really hard to eat that stuff with chopsticks. And I always thought it's really funny when I see people in restaurants trying to eat stuff off of the plate. So, especially if you're doing it family style, you'll see some folks like serve themselves food onto the flat plate and then put rice on that flat plate and then try and eat it with chopsticks. It's really hard to do because they're just two pieces of sticks. So unless you're very, very good with chopsticks, it's going to be really annoying to eat that stuff. So that's definitely the Chinese way of eating with chopsticks is in a rice bowl. And I have never tried to eat anything with chopsticks unless it's in a rice bowl because it's going to be super frustrating. You're going to be eating like a single little bit at a time. So usually if it's not in a rice bowl, probably eating it with a fork. Cool. What kind of oil do I use? Today I'm using grapeseed oil. Really anything that's high heat though will work. So I also use canola all the time or vegetable oil. The most common in a wok cook is going to be peanut oil. But I have stopped buying peanut oil, mainly not because it doesn't work great for wok cooking, but mainly because peanut oil is not a super neutral oil, and that's because it tastes like peanuts. So if you're cooking something, say, that doesn't come together in a wok, so like hash browns is my favorite. I think this is when I discovered this about peanut oil, as I was making hash browns, and I used peanut oil, and it doesn't work because you don't want your hash browns to taste like peanuts. So it's not like super neutral. So in my opinion, at least, if you're only going to keep one kind of high heat oil in the house, it probably shouldn't be peanut oil. It should be either like canola or vegetable oil or grapeseed oil is usually what I use. But if you're going to keep a second kind of oil, I would say the second kind of oil is olive oil, and then if you're going to keep a third kind of oil, it should be peanut oil. Kind of spirit of my parent. Today I'm drinking Woodford Reserve, which is a bourbon. But the main reason that I drink Woodford Reserve is because it tastes like a scotch. So I pretty much exclusively drink scotch, to be honest. If I'm not drinking beer or water, it's probably scotch. Do you ever make a recipe? Oh, I talked about this, yeah. Totally, yeah. So I totally make recipes without meat all the time. A number of the recipes that I've done, at least like the recipe videos, are done with tofu. So I know the pad thai was done with tofu. The broccoli stir fry is done with tofu. There's a veggie stir fry that's up on YouTube already. The Japanese curry was done with tofu, pad thai. What else? I did the gyozas. Those didn't have anything in it actually. That was all vegetarian. That one is actually vegan too, which is crazy. Kind of like accidental vegan. And then yeah, lots of the stuff that I do is usually I'll either substitute it with tofu or just leave the meat out entirely. The one thing I will say is if you're going to substitute the meat with tofu, is don't add the tofu the same way that you would add the meat. So today we marinated our chicken and then added it in very, very early, and that was to get a nice flash cook and sear on the chicken. If you're working with tofu, the tofu is not going to sear that way. So I would either, with tofu, probably skip the marinade and then add it at the very, very end. So I would add it when I added the onions. And that's to make sure that the tofu doesn't start breaking down. So tofu has a very delicate quality about it. So if you add it too early in that really like aggressive wok tossing, it's going to start crumbling, and then you're going to have crumbled bits of tofu. So if you're substituting tofu for chicken for tofu, add it a little bit later. The schedule is supposed to auto update, but it is not lately. So if someone is on the YouTube channel and can tell me what subscriber count we're at, that would be helpful. I don't know what's going on with all of my alert boxes, but Hamcharo isn't showing up. I'm pretty sure that the event list isn't showing up either. Yeah, I'm not sure where we're at. We started at 9:30, I think. 9:30 something. I think it was at 9:30, and I'm not sure what it's at now. Let's see. Cool. Thoughts on General Chicken? Yeah, I love General Chicken. That was one of I think that was the first Panda Express recipe that I did, was their General Tso's chicken, which I found very interesting because they removed their General Tso's chicken from the menu. And I don't know why, because I had it once or twice and it was pretty good. So when I went and dug into the Panda Express General Tso's chicken, I discovered that their General Tso's chicken is not like most General Tso's chicken for a number of reasons. Mainly, well, the first thing I discovered is that they don't use chicken thigh, they use chicken breast. The next thing that I discovered is that it's actually not that crunchy. They have a pretty thin layer of batter coating it, so it's actually, I don't think it's just cornstarch, but it's like mostly cornstarch and flour. So it's actually a pretty tender piece of chicken. And then the third thing that I discovered is that they use a lot of veggies in their General Tso's chicken, which is not super, I won't say common, it's definitely perfectly common to incorporate veggies in a General Tso's chicken, but it's not like super traditional to have veggies in a General Tso's chicken. So all three of those things I found very, very interesting, and that after like recreating that General Tso's chicken recipe was really what inspired me to like learn a little bit more and like kind of deconstruct more of these like Chinese American cuisines, and seeing what they like, why they're assembled this way, like what was the decision making behind assembling a General Tso's chicken that way, which is like to say like a very common Chinese American dish that is not, that they didn't take any of the standard steps to do it. And that to me was super fascinating. It's like, this is a very weird General Tso's chicken. So that recipe up on YouTube. I haven't done that one on live stream in a while, so maybe I'll do that soon. I haven't deep fried anything in a while, so maybe I'll do that soon. 936. Crystal says we're at 936. So if you're watching on YouTube, we're at 936 subscribers. So we have 937. Oh, nice. So we're slowly taking our way to 1,000 subscribers. I'm pretty sure we'll make it, but it's 7 days to go. So on YouTube, I release new recipes every Friday. So this Friday coming up, I'm going to be doing, I think the one coming out this Friday is going to be the Beijing beef, so some Panda Express stuff coming up soon. I did the Panda Express Beijing beef, which was very interesting because I've never tried to deep fry beef before. So that was a very unusual take on, like, not just Chinese food, but like deep frying. I've never seen Angus steak deep fried, so that was very interesting, and honestly like one of the most tasty things that I've ever done, because it's sirloin steak and it's deep fried. So obviously it's really, really good. So that recipe that's coming up this Friday, which will be, I think, the day after Christmas. Yeah, dumplings. We did some dumplings a couple weeks ago. I could do some dumplings again. That was super fun. Then following the Beijing beef, I forget what else. Well, there's definitely a pad see ew recipe coming up. The Shanghai Lion's Head dumplings, Lion's Head meatballs, that's coming up. Kung Pao chicken from PF Chang's, that's coming up soon. I forget what else is coming up. But yeah, for the Panda Express stuff, we've done the Kung Pao chicken now, the Beijing beef, General Tso's chicken, orange chicken coming soon. I'm very intrepid about the orange chicken because that's like the most iconic one. So it's probably like got all of the famous qualities about Panda Express General fried chicken. So that one has to be super crunchy. So take a bite. Yeah, I could definitely take a bite. Yeah, that's really good. I recently discovered mukbang, which is very interesting, weird corner of the internet. Yeah, so if you're interested in stuff like that, I recommend bopping over to the YouTube channel, checking some of that content out. New recipes coming up every Friday. This Friday is going to be Beijing beef. Last Friday I did a Westlake soup recipe, which is a soup that I've been eating since I was a little kid. That was a recipe that was based off of a restaurant that did a Westlake soup in San Francisco called Dragon House. That's no longer there, but I used to eat there when I was a little kid, so that's like a super nostalgic for me. The week before that we did, I think, Thai and curry, and then I think before that might have been this Kung Pao chicken. So new stuff popping up over there every week. Also, if you're interested in following along on these live streams, the things that I'm going to be cooking will pop up at least 24 hours in advance, sometimes more than that. So if you want to cook alongside me, or if you just want to know what I'm going to be cooking ahead of time, the schedule for what I'm cooking is going to pop up on YouTube. Other than that, I'll be here every Tuesday and Thursday, 6:30 PST, Wednesdays at 6 o'clock, except for this week. This will be the last stream of the week because it's Christmas, so I'm going to be out of town for the next couple of days. So the next time I'm going to be streaming is going to be on Tuesday. What else? A couple of folks have asked me if I ever cook stuff that's not Chinese or like Asian, and that stuff pops up on the show that I host on Facebook, which is called Monday Meals with Wu Can Cook, and that's hosted by Bay Street Emeryville. So on the Bay Street Emeryville Facebook page, which I think is just facebook.com/Bay Street Emeryville, that I host a show every Monday at 6 o'clock PST, and that's where I do all of the stuff that's not Asian or Asian themed. So last week or yesterday I did miso glazed Brussels sprouts, which I guess is kind of Asian. Before that, the week before I did, I think, bone-in pork chops, sirloin steak. The week before that, I forget what else, but all of those things, pastas, steaks, anything pan-seared, all of that stuff generally comes up on the Monday Meals show. So if you're interested in stuff like that, that's where I am. That's the reason why I don't stream on Mondays, is because I'm streaming on the Monday Meals page, or the Bay Street Emeryville page for the Monday Meals show. So more information about that on the Reddit page. Or if you just want to poke around Facebook, that's at facebook.com/Bay Street Emeryville. So anyway, thanks for tuning in, guys. My name is Wesley. This is Wu Can Cook. If you have any questions, feel free to keep dropping your questions in the comments, and I'll do my best to circle back and answer everyone. Sometimes I miss questions. A lot of the times I'll miss questions. So I'm very sorry, mainly because I'm facing this direction. So sometimes people ask questions and I'm facing the wrong direction. So feel free, if I missed your question, feel free to repeat it. And I will do my best and circle back and answer in written form. I have a tom yum or pho. Ooh, pho is really scary, but I'd be down to take a shot at it. Pho is really scary though, because that pho broth is like the kind of stuff where that's a family secret that's been guarded for like 100 years. So that pho broth and also ramen broth, those are the two big things that are like, ooh, I don't know. I could probably do a pretty good one, but it's not going to be like recreating the legendary, ramen broth from Panda, Kung Fu Panda or something. It was like, I don't know, that's really hard. But so that is sort of like trying to recreate like the Doritos recipe. What it reminds me of is like some of those things are like family guarded secrets for hundreds of years. So okay, yeah. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next Tuesday or Monday if you tune in on Monday Meals. So thanks everyone. Pop over to YouTube if you're not already there. Give that channel a subscribe. I think we're at 937 now. something like that. I don't know what's going on with this stupid bar, but I'll see you soon.
Coming out of left field. Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kicks now. I've been feeling it since 1966 now. Might be over now, but I feel it still. Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kicks now. Let me kick it like it's 1986 now. Might be over now, but I feel it still. Got another mouth to feed. Leave it with the babysitter, mama call the grave digger. Gone with the falling leaves. Am I coming out of left field? Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kicks now. I've been feeling it since 1966 now. Might have had your fill, I feel it still. Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kicks now. Let me kick it like it's 1986 now. Might be over now, I can feel it still. We can fight a war for peace. Give in to that easy living. Goodbye to my hopes and dreams. Stop flipping for my enemies. We could wait until the walls come down. It's time to give a little to the kids in the middle. But oh, until it falls, won't bother me. I'm a rebel just for kicks. Yeah, you lovers and a bitch for my heart to eclipse. Might be over now, I feel it still. Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kicks now. Let me kick it like it's 1986 now. Might be over now, but I feel it still. Might have had your fill, I can feel it still. Oh.